There is a quiet hour that belongs to no one and everyone at once. It arrives after the last footsteps fade from the street, after the world has finished whispering its final thoughts for the day, and before the sunrise has even begun imagining its first color. In that small, hushed gap between one day and the next, the hearth inside an old stone cottage still glows softly, as though it understands that warmth doesn't sleep simply because the night has grown still. The cottage sits at the edge of a quiet lane, just beyond the final lamplight, where fields stretch into gentle darkness and the faint outline of distant hills rests like folded blankets beneath the sky. From outside, only a thin ribbon of smoke reveals that someone remains awake inside. It curls upward lazily, unhurried, as though drifting with dreams rather than wind. Inside, the air smells of cedar and faint honey, with just a trace of bread baked earlier in the evening. The walls are lined with shelves that do not ask for attention. They simply hold memories, bundles of dried herbs, a smooth stone found beside a river decades ago, a jar filled with old wooden matchsticks, and a small collection of candles melted into quiet, thoughtful shapes. Near the hearth sits a sturdy wooden chair, worn smooth by the presence of the same figure night after night. The Hearthkeeper settles there each evening, not as a watcher guarding against danger, but as a quiet companion to the flames. With slow hands and gentle patience, they tend the logs, listen to the way the fire breathes, and keep company with the peaceful rhythm of crackle and glow. Next to the chair rests a leather-bound journal, its edges softened by time. Each page holds soft handwriting, curves of ink shaped carefully, as though the words themselves deserve rest. This is the Hearthkeeper's night tradition, a ritual of reflection, gratitude, and the simple noticing of life. Not solving, not fixing, not racing, just noticing. The world outside may sometimes hurry and twist itself into knots, but here the fire unfolds them, one by one. And tonight, as the flames lift their small sparks into the chimney, and the night presses gently against the windows, another page waits to be written. Another evening is ready to be remembered, slowly, with kindness. In the Hearthkeeper's gentle night journal, if you listen softly, almost like leaning closer to a warm blanket, you can feel the story beginning, not with noise or urgency, but with the comforting permission to breathe a little easier. Nothing asks anything of you here. Nothing must be solved. Nothing needs to hurry. Only the quiet warmth of the hearth, the softness of the night, and the gentle unfolding of thoughts that finally feel safe enough to rest. The evening began the way most evenings did in the Hearthkeeper's cottage, with the small ritual of quiet preparation. Dusk slipped over the village slowly, like a shawl being drawn across the shoulders of the world, and the Hearthkeeper moved through the rooms with practiced tenderness, as though everything inside the cottage were alive in its own thoughtful way. The windows were old, framed in wood, touched many times by morning light and winter frost. As twilight deepened, they reflected the faint amber shimmer of the hearth like small pools of warmth. The Hearthkeeper paused beside one, looking out toward the road where the last soft echoes of life drifted past. A lone cart rolling home, a distant door closing, a dog settling into its nighttime circle of rest. Beyond the village, the fields faded into gentle darkness. There were fences, yes, but they felt less like boundaries and more like quiet guides marking where one meadow ended and another began. Birds tucked themselves into hedgerows. The sky took on a deep blue calm, the sort of blue that seems as though it could hold every worry gently and slowly dissolve it. The Hearthkeeper had long ago learned that nothing truly needed to be rushed at this hour. Inside, the cottage welcomed the evening as though it had been waiting for it. The kettle rested on the stove, patient and familiar. A soft stack of neatly folded cloths sat beside the basin. A small loaf of bread, baked earlier and brushed with a hint of butter, cooled beneath a cloth. Everywhere, the signs of a lived day quietly softened into night. With slow hands, the Hearthkeeper placed another log onto the embers. The fire accepted it the way a gentle friend accepts a hand, carefully, without insistence. The flames licked upward, steady and unhurried, turning wood into warmth in the most patient way imaginable. The journal waited nearby, not like a task, more like a place where thoughts knew they would not be judged, a place where the simple details of life were allowed to matter. The Hearthkeeper sat, easing into the familiar wooden chair, letting the body settle into stillness. Years had shaped the chair to match the shape of quiet evenings, and sitting in it felt like being welcomed into something softer than time. For a while, nothing happened, and that was the point. There was only the faint whisper of fire, the soft sigh of the kettle beginning to warm, and the gentle creak of the cottage responding to nighttime. Outside, a breeze brushed past the walls, not as a disturbance, but as a reminder that the world continued peacefully beyond the stone and wood. The Hearthkeeper opened the leather-bound journal, its pages smelling faintly of ink and pine resin. Some pages were filled with reflections of weather. The frost was delicate this morning. It looked as if the fields had been dusted with powdered stars. Some captured small encounters. A child waved on the road today, and I remembered what it feels like to be greeted simply because one exists. Others described the way shadows moved, or how the sound of rain had felt like slow applause. Tonight, the page remained blank for several breaths. Blank was welcome. Blank meant there was still time to listen. The Hearthkeeper dipped the pen slowly, then began to write, not from urgency, not from any need to tell something dramatic, but from a quiet wish to notice gently. The fire has settled differently tonight. It leans toward the left side of the hearth, as if it is thinking. The logs are patient. The house feels rested in its bones. The pen moved again. I carried the last of the summer herbs inside today. They rustled as though whispering goodbye to the light. I thanked them. It felt right to thank them. Writing felt like breathing without effort. Thoughts arrived in soft curves instead of heavy lines. Memories opened slowly, only as much as they wished. The Hearthkeeper paused, allowing the moment to stretch, listening both to the room and to something quieter, a stillness that often revealed itself only when the night deepened. It was the same stillness that had once comforted travelers stopping by the cottage, the same stillness that had held the Hearthkeeper during lonely winters and joyful springs alike. The hearth had witnessed it all. It had been there through seasons of laughter, seasons of loss, seasons when words flowed easily, and seasons when silence felt like company. And always, the Hearthkeeper returned to it, not because the fire solved anything, but because it welcomed everything. The cottage, in its simplicity, seemed to understand that human hearts sometimes needed places where they were allowed to arrive slowly. The Hearthkeeper's tea finally finished steeping, a mild blend of chamomile and mint with just a hint of lemon peel. The cup steamed gently, the handle warmed by touch, and the first sip spread through the chest like a soft lantern being lit. Outside, the night deepened further. One by one, windows across the village faded into darkness as households drifted into rest. The distant clock in the square chimed, not sharply, not sternly, but like a memory of time rather than a command. The Hearthkeeper wrote again. Tonight I feel a small ache beneath my ribs, not painful, just present. It feels like the weight of words that haven't yet found their shape. I do not rush them. I simply hold them. There was something comforting in acknowledging feelings without trying to direct them. The Hearthkeeper had learned through many winters that some emotions did not want fixing. They wanted warmth. They wanted room. They wanted a listening fire and a page that allowed them to rest for a while before fading gently on their own. The flames shifted, throwing soft shadows across the stone walls, shadows that moved like drifting thoughts. The wood gave a quiet sigh, the kind that happens when heat finds its way through the grain. The cottage felt alive in the calmest way. Near the mantel stood objects that had stories of their own: a worn wooden box, a smooth river pebble shaped like a heart, an old clock that no longer ticked yet remained there, because it remembered years the Hearthkeeper still cherished. None of these things were grand. All of them meant something. The Hearthkeeper leaned back, allowing shoulders to drop, noticing the softness of breath, in and out, without any effort to control it. Time seemed to loosen its grip. The journal page welcomed more words. The night teaches me, again and again, that life often quiets itself when I do not push. I listen, I write, I tend the fire. That is enough. Outside, a faint rustle moved through the trees, perhaps a fox traveling along familiar paths, perhaps only wind. Even the unknown felt harmless here. The Hearthkeeper smiled softly, not to anyone, not for any reason, simply because the moment felt kind. Another sip of tea, another small crackle in the fire, another breath, slow, steady, present. If someone had walked past the cottage now, though few ever did at this hour, they might have seen only a faint orange glow through the curtains, nothing more. They would not have known that inside, a gentle intimacy existed between warmth and reflection, between the quiet mind and the whispering fire. The journal, its page filling steadily, began to hold tonight's memory. There is peace tonight, not the loud sort, not the sort that demands attention, a peace that feels like wool against winter skin, like a soft word said at just the right time, like knowing the world can rest for a while, and I may rest with it. As part one draws toward its quiet closing moment, the Hearthkeeper gently placed the pen down and closed the journal with care, not abruptly, not with finality, but like someone pressing a soft blanket over something precious. The fire dimmed into a steady glow. The night outside breathed, and the Hearthkeeper sat quietly for a while longer, simply existing in the space between thoughts, feeling the comfort of being held by a familiar room, by a faithful hearth, and by the simple truth that nothing more was required of this moment. Part one ends not with conclusion, but with warmth waiting to deepen. The journal would open again soon. The night still had more gentle stories to share. The hearth had settled into a steady rhythm, the kind that didn't rush the room, but held it like an embrace. The flames no longer leapt playfully as they had earlier. Instead, they swayed in unhurried arcs, as though they had finally learned the language of patience. The logs glowed a deeper orange, their edges softening into charcoal, and the fire made the small sounds of quiet thinking, the occasional sigh, the understated whisper, the hush of embers shifting their weight. Outside, the night continued to deepen, yet inside, there was the feeling that time had loosened its grip. Moments unspooled more gently. Thoughts moved slower. The walls, shelves, and worn floorboards seemed to listen with the same calm attentiveness as the Hearthkeeper himself. He moved with the certainty of someone who had long practiced the art of not hurrying. The hearth demanded no rush. The night asked for no urgency. His work was not a task, but a presence, something that accompanied the quiet hours instead of trying to conquer them. On the nearby table, his journal rested slightly open, as though it had taken a deep breath and paused. The ink glistened faintly in the light, reflecting lines written earlier, quiet reflections about the evening wind, about the way the fire had taken hold, about the gentle stillness drifting through the cottage. The Hearthkeeper ran his fingers lightly across the worn leather cover, not to begin writing again just yet, but as a simple grounding gesture, as though reminding himself that stories, thoughts, and memories didn't need to be captured all at once. They could return when they were ready. They always did. He stood up for a moment and walked toward the window. The night outside was not loud or overwhelming. It was vast and soft at the same time. Stars glimmered in slow, patient rhythms. A distant tree line formed a gentle silhouette, and the moon appeared like a thoughtful companion rather than a distant celestial body. The world felt less like something to analyze and more like something to lean into. He could feel the invisible thread connecting inside and outside, warmth meeting coolness, glow meeting dark. He knew that part of his role, in ways he could never fully explain, was not only to tend the fire, but to honor these quiet connections. Behind him, the fire sighed again. He turned back and resumed his seat, placing another small log near the hearth. Not inside yet, just near enough that it could warm slowly before joining the flames. He had learned long ago that even wood needed time to adjust, to become ready. Nothing here was ever forced. The cottage walls carried the faint smells of years of gentle living. Dried herbs hung in bundles near the beams. Soft wool blankets draped over the back of chairs, and shelves filled with carefully stored teas and old letters. Everything seemed to have its own story, yet none of the stories shouted. They all rested peacefully in the soft corners of memory. He leaned back slightly and allowed himself to feel the warmth, not only physically, but inwardly. The warmth that wasn't about heat alone, but about permission to be slow, to be thoughtful, to not rush to conclusions, to let the mind stretch out and relax as naturally as a cat curling near the fire. There had been days once, long ago, when everything had felt hurried and fragmented, when thoughts collided instead of flowing, when the mind had carried its own storms from morning until night. Now, the storms had softened into gentle weather. The Hearthkeeper picked up the small brush he used to sweep stray ash into the pan. Each movement was quiet, circular, mindful. He didn't try to erase the evidence of the fire's life, only to guide it, to keep it from spilling into places it didn't belong. The hearth, he knew, was a conversation, not a command. He paused once more, letting stillness gather around him again. The journal seemed to invite him gently, not insistently, a soft presence beside him. He opened it further and began writing again, his handwriting relaxed, unhurried, drifting across the page as calmly as the embers glowed. "Tonight the fire is thoughtful," he wrote. "Not bright, not loud. A listening fire, the kind that keeps company rather than calls attention. The night feels older than usual, but not in a heavy way, more like a well-read book resting open on the table." He continued, not to document or analyze, but simply to describe, as though painting the night with language helped the mind settle even more deeply into quiet understanding. His words were not for anyone else. They weren't meant to impress, explain, or convince. They were a gentle practice, a ritual that reminded him his thoughts didn't have to run. They could sit by the fire and breathe. Occasionally, a faint creak whispered through the cottage, the sound of wood gently shifting, of beams settling into the night. Nothing abrupt, nothing startling, everything slow, everything patient. He set his pen down again. Another log joined the fire, this time with the softest of welcomes. No harsh crack, only a warm merging. The flame curled around it gently, as if encouraging it to rest as part of the glowing whole. He closed his eyes, not to sleep yet, but to listen. He listened to the crackling that resembled distant thoughts resolving themselves. He listened to the way the air moved softly through the room. He listened to the subtle language of calm, a language he had come to know deeply over the years. Somewhere far beyond the cottage, the wind brushed through open fields. Somewhere a river moved quietly over stones. Somewhere, a traveler might be looking at the same stars and feeling the same quiet pull toward rest. The Hearthkeeper smiled faintly. He had never thought of himself as someone important, but he knew, in a gentle, humble way, that the simple act of keeping a hearth alive could matter in ways words could not fully explain. Warm spaces had a way of gathering tired thoughts, giving them soft places to lie down. He stirred the embers slightly, not to excite the fire, but to let new warmth rise slowly from beneath. The glow deepened, spreading through the logs like a calming breath. He matched his breathing with it, slow in, gentle out, until even his inner world felt aligned with the rhythm. Minutes passed, or perhaps more, without needing to be counted. Time loosened entirely, becoming something wide and forgiving. He returned to his journal one final time for the evening and roti. The night is kind. The fire knows what to do. And I remember, again, that quiet is not empty. Quiet is full of everything that doesn't need to rush. He let the pen rest. He let himself rest. And around him, the night continued to be beautifully, tenderly, unhurried. The fire had grown quieter still, as though it too had begun to read the room. The flames no longer stretched upward in bright conversation. Instead, they folded into themselves, glowing low and steady, holding the cottage in a cradle of soft light. Shadows moved like slow tides across the walls, drifting without urgency, as if they had all the time in the world. The Hearthkeeper rested his hands on the table for a while, feeling the faint grain of the wood beneath his palms. It had taken years of use to become so smooth. Years of journal entries, brewed tea, and quiet nights. He liked to think that the table remembered everything, not as clear stories, but as impressions, gentle layers of life that had settled into the wood the way warmth settles into the bones. He reached for the kettle, listening to the muted slosh of water as he poured. Steam rose in delicate ribbons, curling upward and dissolving into the air. Even the tea he brewed was simple, nothing bold, nothing sharp. Only an herb he had dried himself from a patch that grew behind the cottage. Its scent was soft and familiar, like late summer remembered in winter. He waited while it steeped, not filling the waiting with anything else. There was no need. Waiting could simply be waiting. He glanced at the journal again. The open page seemed to glow faintly in the firelight. Words he had written earlier appeared softer now, as though they, too, had settled. He turned the page gently, revealing a blank sheet, pristine, unhurried, full of possibility, yet not demanding to be filled. He breathed in slowly and let the pencil hover. Writing at night had become less of a habit and more of a companion practice, not an obligation, but a way of listening inwardly. When the world quieted, thoughts emerged that were gentler than the ones daytime often carried. They walked more slowly. They spoke more kindly. He began not with analysis, not with judgments, but with noticing. There is a calm tonight that feels older than me, he wrote, letting the pencil glide softly. It sits in the corners of the cottage. It lingers in the space between each sound. It reminds me that everything, even the restless parts of the mind, eventually learns how to rest. He paused, letting the sentence breathe. Outside, the moon had shifted slightly higher, casting a pale silver wash across the frost-coated ground. The light filtered faintly through the window pane, mixing with the golden glow from the fire dusk and warmth woven together. He took his first sip of tea. It carried with it not only flavor but memory. Summer evenings cutting herbs, tying them in bundles, hanging them along the rafters to dry. He remembered the way sunlight filtered through those same windows months ago, dust drifting lazily in the air with the same patience the night now held in silence. He smiled, realizing something quietly. The hearth didn't just keep the cottage warm, it gave time a shape. It slowed things down enough that life could be noticed instead of rushed past. He set the cup down and continued to write. There was a time when I believed rest had to be earned. That quiet came only after everything was solved, everything finished, everything arranged just right. Now I know that quiet is here all along, waiting patiently beneath the noise. His handwriting softened as he wrote, growing looser, more fluid. He did not write to accomplish. He wrote to soften. Another gentle shift sounded in the wood beams above, like an old house stretching in sleep. He listened to it with the same attention someone else might give to a conversation. This cottage had been with him long enough to feel almost alive, a companion that understood the language of seasons and storms. He thought briefly of how many nights he had spent like this, the fire glowing, the kettle warming, the journal open, the world outside stretching into an endless quiet. And yet somehow each night still felt new, not repetitive, not dull, just familiar in the comforting way that a favorite song is familiar, one that never needs to surprise to be meaningful. His pencil moved again. Sometimes the mind tries to rehearse every possibility, as though it must carry tomorrow like a weight. But tonight reminds me the future does not ask to be solved all at once. It asks only to be approached gently when it arrives, with the same care as adding a new log to the fire, slowly, thoughtfully, without rushing the burn. He stopped and rested his eyes on the hearth. The embers shimmered deeply, each one pulsing faintly. He thought of them like thoughts, not dangerous, not overwhelming, simply warm at their own pace. Ideas, feelings, memories, all held in the glow, all allowed to be there without pressure to become anything else. He picked up the iron poker, stirring just enough to let hidden warmth rise. A few sparks whispered upward, dancing briefly before fading into the chimney. The act felt like a metaphor he didn't even need to articulate. He set the poker aside gently, as though respecting the quiet again. He returned to his chair, letting his body sink into the soft cushion worn by years of evenings just like this. He could feel his breath sensing with everything around him. The slow rhythmic crackle of wood, the delicate shifting of shadows, the soft hum of nighttime beyond the walls. Unlike many stories, His life now did not revolve around excitement or conflict. It revolved around tending flames, tending thoughts, tending small pieces of peace that others often overlook. He wasn't lonely. He wasn't waiting for adventure. He had discovered something he wished he could explain to the hurried world. There was a depth to quiet living, a richness to slowness. He dipped the pencil again. There is a softness I want to remember, he continued. Not dramatic comfort, not forced positivity. Just the steady reminder that nothing inside me needs to be rushed into clarity. Even uncertainty can rest by the fire. He paused, letting the truth of that settle inside him. Some nights brought heavier thoughts, old worries, distant echoes of expectations he once carried. But here, in the glow of the hearth, even those thoughts softened, like frost melting when the sun rose. He took another sip of tea. The flavor was milder now, calmer, as though it too had settled. Beyond the window, he saw the faint motion of clouds drifting across the moon. They did not hurry either. They passed silently, softly transforming the light, shading the world gently instead of covering it abruptly. The changing brightness washed through the cottage in pulses, a subtle rhythm he found deeply comforting. He thought of all the travelers who might have once stopped by this hearth over the years, strangers passing through, villagers seeking warmth, friends pausing for quiet conversation. He remembered laughter, long talks, shared silences. He remembered listening to other lives unfold in bits and pieces, always knowing that the hearth had helped them pause, even if only for a night. He wrote again, this time more reflectively. I have learned that people don't always come here for answers. They come because the night feels less heavy when shared with a warm room. And sometimes, all that needs to happen is a fire being tended while someone remembers how to breathe again. He let the pencil linger after that line, the truth of it echoing softly inside him. The kettle gave a quiet sigh as the remaining warmth inside it shifted. Not boiling, not bubbling, simply letting him know it was still there. He refilled his cup halfway, enjoying the ritual more than the drink itself. He closed his eyes for a moment, not to escape, just to feel. He felt the cushion beneath him. He felt the warmth touching his hands. He felt the serenity of the room, like a soft blanket around the mind. Thoughts drifted in and out, memories of childhood winters, where the world outside had seemed much larger and far more uncertain. He remembered lying awake some nights back then, not because anything was wrong, but because the future was unknown and his mind worked endlessly to try to see it clearly. He wished he could speak to that younger version of himself, not to reveal answers, but to offer the reassurance he now carried. You don't need to see everything yet. You just need somewhere warm to rest your thoughts. He slowly opened his eyes again. The cottage offered no judgment, only presence, and perhaps that was the secret. He glanced at the journal once more, not out of obligation, but out of quiet gratitude for the way it allowed him to process gently. He continued writing with very slow strokes. Tonight feels like a reminder that solitude is not emptiness. It is simply the soft space in which the heart can remember itself without noise. Outside, an owl called faintly, not loud, not haunting, merely part of the natural tapestry of nighttime life. Its voice floated across the fields, then faded into distance, leaving only silence behind. Even that sound seemed respectful of the quiet here. The Hearthkeeper leaned back, letting the silence deepen. He did not feel the urge to finish the page. He did not feel the urge to conclude the night. Instead, he rested in the in-between, the place where nothing needed to be decided, where everything simply was. The fire glowed more deeply now, almost like a heartbeat in the room. He thought about the simple truth that had shaped his nights. A tended fire stays gentle. Left ignored, it might fade away too quickly or flare unpredictably, but guided softly with patience, it became something steady, enduring, safe. He had learned that the mind worked the same way. It didn't need suppression. It didn't need to be driven relentlessly. It needed warmth, attention, and room to settle. He closed the journal quietly, not as an ending, but as a pause, the kind that promises return. Then he simply sat, letting the atmosphere continue its quiet work. The room, the fire, the moonlit window, the slowly cooling tea, everything became part of one continuous exhale. Time thinned, the night felt wide, and the Hearthkeeper remained there in the glow, practicing, without force, without ceremony, the gentle art he had quietly come to understand, keeping warmth alive, both in the room and inside himself. The Hearthkeeper did not notice the passing of minutes or hours. Night, once again, had become something timeless, not measured by clocks or tasks, but by the shifting glow of embers, the slow cooling of tea, and the gentle change in the hue of shadows along the walls. He felt no need to write, no need to move, no need to fill the space. Silence itself felt like company. The journal rested closed on the table, its edges softly frayed from use, its pages slightly curved, like the spine of someone who had spent a lifetime bowing politely to listening. He ran a thoughtful hand over the cover, not with attachment, but with gratitude. Tools of quiet living carried their own subtle grace. A soft breeze brushed against the window pane, not enough to rattle it, only enough to whisper along the glass. Frost patterns formed delicate shapes, like feathers, like ferns, spreading in slow, intricate lines. They looked as though the night had been painting silently, savoring every stroke. The Hearthkeeper stood and walked to the window. He didn't rush. He didn't hurry. He simply allowed his body to move in rhythm with the room. He rested his fingertips lightly against the cool glass. Outside, the world felt wrapped in stillness. Fields glimmered faintly with frost, reflecting the moon's quiet silver glow. Trees stood calmly as silhouettes, their bare branches like open hands. Nothing hurried, nothing ached to be elsewhere. He watched, not as an observer detached from the scene, but as someone gently woven into it. Breath fogged the pain in soft pulses, fading as soon as it appeared. He smiled faintly at the simple reminder. Presence exists moment by moment, dissolving, renewing, dissolving again. He turned back toward the hearth. The fire did not need much attention, only a tender guiding hand now and then. He added a small log, placing it carefully so as not to disturb the steady warmth already dancing there. The flames accepted it slowly, wrapping around the wood with patience, coaxing it into a shared glow rather than demanding rapid burn. The Hearthkeeper sat once more, easing back into the chair in a way that felt almost like settling into a deeper layer of himself. His thoughts drifted, not with urgency, but with curiosity softened by compassion. He thought about the people he had met across years, each arriving with their own private weather. Some carried storms of worry, others held silent griefs. A few brought restless hopes that fluttered like birds against the cage of the chest. And yet, by the time they left the cottage, their expressions always seemed gentler, as though the hearth had taught them a language beyond words. He did not imagine himself as the source of that comfort. He knew the quiet did most of the work. All he ever truly did was make space for it. He leaned forward slightly and spoke aloud, though no one else was there. Not everything needs answers tonight. The sentence entered the air like a sigh and disappeared into the glow. He realized, as the words faded, that they applied not only to visitors, but also to himself. Even those who knew how to tend fires occasionally forgot that their own minds didn't require solving every flicker. He lifted the kettle again, pouring the last remnants of warm water into his mug. This time, he didn't add herbs. He simply enjoyed the warmth alone, almost flavorless, almost invisible, yet deeply comforting. He held the mug between both hands. The heat seeped into his palms, then radiated upward, easing into his forearms, shoulders, chest, as if warmth had become a slow, moving river traveling gently through the body. His breathing fell naturally into rhythm with it, each inhale gathering softness, each exhale releasing tiny threads of tension he hadn't realized were still lingering. In the quiet, he felt deeply connected to something simple and reassuring, the understanding that life did not always require momentum. Sometimes its truest richness emerged when things were still. He looked toward one of the shelves by the wall. Along it sat little objects collected over years, not trophies, not prizes, just quiet reminders, a smooth river stone, a tiny carved bird, an old brass key from a door long replaced, and a small unfinished piece of wood he had once planned to carve but never did. He rose and walked toward the shelf. His steps were silent on the worn floorboards. He picked up the unfinished wood piece, turning it slowly in his hands. Its surface was partly rough, partly sanded smooth, a project paused long ago and never resumed. For a moment he considered what it might have been. Perhaps a tiny bowl, perhaps a figurine, perhaps nothing more than practice. He smiled. It didn't matter that it remained unfinished. Not everything needed completion to hold meaning. He placed it back, this time not as forgotten clutter, but as a symbol, something that spoke softly. It is okay for things to remain in progress. He returned to his chair and let the fire's reflections wash across him. The room had taken on a deeper amber glow now, richer and more encompassing. Even the spaces between the shadows felt warm. Every object seemed to belong exactly where it was. Nothing more, nothing less. He allowed his mind to wander through gentle memories, evenings filled with laughter, mornings filled with slow silence, days of tending gardens, nights like this one, endlessly repeating and endlessly unique. He thought about how many seasons the hearth had witnessed. Winters of heavy snow, springs of soft rain tapping the roof, summers where the fire rested and windows stood open to invite breezes through, autumns rich with the scent of wood being stacked, prepared for colder months ahead. Life, he realized, was less about controlling those seasons and more about moving kindly within them. He took another slow breath and felt gratitude, simple, undemanding gratitude, for the fact that he was here, alive, at peace, listening to night breathe. The fire gave a low, reassuring crackle. He glanced down at his hands, hands that had built, repaired, carried, written, tended. They were weathered but steady, and he felt a deep kindness toward them, as though thanking them silently for every day they had carried warmth forward. He closed his eyes again, not drifting into sleep yet, but hovering just at the edge, where thoughts float lightly and sensations become both closer and softer. He noticed how each muscle gradually loosened, shoulders relaxing, jaw softening, chest easing, legs sinking deeper into the chair. The cottage seemed to hold him the way a gentle lake holds a leaf drifting on the surface. From this place between waking and dreaming, he sensed something subtle. The hearth wasn't just inside the room, it was inside him, a steady inner glow that had learned, through years of practice, how to stay gentle even when thoughts tried to flicker wildly. He remembered earlier years when he might have tried to silence thoughts by force. Now he simply invited them into the glow, letting them rest until they naturally softened. The night deepened. Far in the distance, a faint wind brushed the treetops, but arrived here only as the softest murmur. The world beyond the cottage lay peaceful, blanketed under moonlit stillness. He spoke again, just above a whisper. Let the world take care of itself for now. The words drifted through the space, joining the atmosphere rather than disturbing it. The very act of saying them seemed to loosen something inside, as though permission had been given for everything unnecessary to fade quietly into the background. He reached for the journal again, not to analyze, not to explain, but to write a final reflection for the night. The pencil touched paper. Peace, I've learned, doesn't come from perfect circumstances. It comes from the willingness to meet whatever is here with warmth, the way a hearth meets every log, not judging its shape or scars, only offering flame. He wrote the sentence slowly, letting the meaning sink deeper than the page. Then he closed the journal once more. The act felt like tucking a blanket gently around the edges of the evening. There were no conclusions to draw, no final thoughts to arrange, just a quiet readiness to let the night continue its slow unfolding. He sat back, letting his gaze rest softly upon the glowing coals. They pulsed in waves, brighter, dimmer, brighter again, like breaths of light. Watching them soothed something wordless inside him. It felt like being reminded of an ancient rhythm that existed long before worry did. Minutes, or perhaps longer, drifted by like low clouds. The cottage seemed to lean into the presence of the hearth, surrendered entirely to the softness of night. Across the room, the frost on the window now resembled tiny galaxies frozen in glass, or constellations, or threads of silver lace. The Hearthkeeper felt deeply connected, not in a grand, overwhelming sense, but in a quiet one, the way a single star belongs to the night sky without needing to shine brighter than the rest. He whispered again, for himself, for anyone who might one day sit here in silency. It's enough just to be here, and the room, the hearth, the journal, the shadows, the soft breath of frost seemed to agree. The night moved on with unhurried grace, carrying with it the knowledge that warmth, when tended gently, becomes more than heat. It becomes a way of living. The attic had settled into a hush so complete that even the house seemed to be breathing slower. The old rafters no longer creaked with restless echoes. The windows no longer whispered drafts across the floorboards, and somewhere outside, the storm that had arrived earlier had softened into a quiet, patient snowfall. You sit there for a moment, simply listening, not to thoughts, not to worries, just to the stillness. The crackling fire continues its slow, steady song, not demanding attention, only keeping you company, as if it understands that silence can sometimes feel heavy and needs a gentle companion. The journal in your hands rests closed now, not forgotten, but content to be still for a while. You exhale, and it feels deeper than before, not forced, not intentional, just natural, like your body finally remembered how to let go all by itself. The chair beneath you carries your weight easily, its cushions softened by years of quiet evenings like this one. Whoever sat here before must have also needed refuge, must have also searched for a place where thoughts could melt, where the noise of life could fade into softer shapes. It feels comforting to know that others needed rest too. You rest your hand on the cover of the journal again, tracing its faded design. You now understand something you didn't fully realize earlier. This attic isn't really about forgotten memories. It's about pauses, moments between everything else, spaces that allow the heart to breathe. Pages meant not just for stories, but for silence. You glance around. The shelves are no longer mysterious or intimidating. You see them differently now. They aren't relics. They're guardians of quiet. Books gently sleeping, objects resting in their stories without demanding attention. Each one holding something once important, now gently at peace. And you begin to feel that same peace spreading into you, slowly, softly, like warm light filling the darker corners of your mind. A faint wind sighs along the roof, brushing over the old shingles. Snowflakes drift past the attic window, each one drifting with its own unhurried rhythm. The world outside is no longer pressing at the edges of your thoughts. It feels distant. It feels manageable. The fireplace crackles again, and a tiny ember pops, glowing bright before settling into gentle orange coals. The glow stretches lazily across the rug and wooden floor, reaching toward your feet, as though it wants to wrap around them like a blanket. And without realizing it, your shoulders relax, a bit lower, a bit lighter, a bit freer. There is no rush, no countdown, no next thing demanding your attention. For once, time feels generous. You lean your head back against the chair and close your eyes for a brief moment, not to sleep yet, but to savor the feeling of existing without effort. Breathing happens on its own, the rhythm slow and easy, as if synced with the quiet room. Inhaler, exhaler, and there, in that rhythm, something begins to shift. It starts as a gentle thought, not big, not overwhelming, just a realization. You don't have to solve everything tonight. You don't have to plan your entire future in a single sitting. You don't have to replay every conversation, every mistake, every worry. Tonight is not for fixing. Tonight is for resting. The attic, the fire, the snow, the journal, all of it seems to agree with that idea. The atmosphere doesn't push you to reflect or analyze. It simply holds you, the way a calm night holds the moon. And as if the room can sense your surrender, the shadows soften even more. They no longer stretch long and uncertain, but gather gently in corners, like sleepy animals curling up for the night. Your mind follows. Thoughts slow, not by force, but because there is nowhere urgent for them to go. It feels like drifting, not lost, but safely carried. You open your eyes again and look toward the small round window. Snow has begun to cling to the corners of the glass, forming delicate lace patterns. The world outside looks muted, wrapped in winter's quiet patience. A faint glow from the distant town below flickers across the horizon, softened by the falling snow. That tiny glow reminds you that life goes on outside these walls, but for now, it doesn't need you, and that feels freeing. A soft whisper crosses your mind. Maybe rest is also a form of strength, not avoidance, not laziness, but giving the heart space to gather itself again. The idea settles comfortably, like another warm blanket. You look once more toward the journal. For a moment, you consider opening it again, but instead, your hand relaxes and you let it stay closed. Not every moment needs to be filled. Not every quiet has to become a story. Sometimes the most powerful chapter is the one where you simply breathe. You imagine, just for a second, what the writer who owned this attic once felt. Maybe they sat here on heavy days too. Maybe they stared at the same falling snow, the same familiar shelves, and felt their racing thoughts gently slow. You realize you are connected to them, not by story, but by being human. And that connection, that quiet understanding, is enough. The fire deepens into slower embers. The crackling becomes softer, occasional. The room responds to it, becoming even more hushed. Every sound grows rounder, smoother, as if the night itself is cushioning it. You notice your eyelids feeling heavier, not with fatigue, but with comfort, like they trust that if they close, nothing urgent will be missed. Your hands rest gently in your lap. Your breathing is rhythmic, peaceful. You can feel the subtle weight of sleep approaching, not looming, just arriving politely, like a guest who knocks softly before entering. And you realize something important. You don't need to hold the whole world tonight. You can set it down, just for a while. Another breath moves through you, and with it, the last bits of tension slip away. The edges of your awareness blur softly. thoughts drift, scatter, fade, replaced by gentle images. Snow drifting through lamplight, a quiet journal resting closed, a warm hearth lighting a still room. All simple, all peaceful. Your mind follows the snow's slow fall, letting each drifting flake carry away a small weight, a leftover worry, a lingering noise. By the time those flakes touch the ground in your imagination, they melt into calm. And the attic, your refuge for tonight, feels almost like it's breathing with you, slowly, steadily, patiently. You let your head tilt slightly, your body loosening in the chair, and the final awareness you hold is not of thoughts, but of feeling. Warmth, safety, permission to rest. Outside, the winter night continues to listen, and the world keeps turning quietly, gently, without urgency. Tomorrow will arrive when it's ready, and when it does, you'll meet it with more softness than before. But tonight belongs to quiet hearts and unhurried breaths. Tonight belongs to rooms like this one, to attics that hold silence without judgment. Tonight belongs to you, finally allowed to let go. And as the fire fades into its last, glowing embers, the final thought that drifts through your settling mind is simple, comforting, and true. You are safe here. You can rest now. The attic is quieter now than at any moment before. The fire has faded into a sleepy glow, just soft embers resting beneath their veil of ash, and the room seems to hum with a calmer kind of silence. Not empty, not cold, just quiet in the most comforting way. Everything has settled. The shelves are no longer mysterious. The window no longer feels distant. Even your thoughts have grown faint and feather light, drifting like snowflakes across a moonlit sky. You sit there, wrapped in warmth and stillness, and you can feel the gentle truth of this moment. Nothing else is required of you tonight. Not effort, not answers, not strength. Just rest. The world outside continues turning, but here, in this small safe corner of night, time loosens its grip. The hours stretch softly, blending together like watercolor across paper. You don't need to keep track of them anymore. All you need to do is breathe, slowly, easily, naturally, in and out, like waves rolling over a quiet shore. The attic holds you like a memory that refuses to fade, warm, patient, understanding. There is something timeless about this place, something that feels older than worry and gentler than fear. It's as if countless nights have passed through here before, each one quietly offering refuge to someone who needed it. Tonight, it's your turn, and this space honors that. Your body softens further into the chair. You can feel how tired muscles quietly let go, one by one, as if they've finally been given permission to stop trying so hard. There is no tension that needs to stay, nothing that must remain guarded. You are safe enough to soften, safe enough to be quiet inside, safe enough to rest. The journal rests peacefully on the table. The pen beside it lies still, as if it too has finished its work for the night. Not every feeling needed to become a sentence. Not every memory needed to be written down. Some moments are meant only to be felt. And this quiet closing of the night is one of them. A delicate wind drifts along the roof, whispering its soft winter lullaby. The snow outside continues falling in slow motion, blanketing the world in white silence. Every sound is cushioned, tender, gentle, like the earth itself is sighing into sleep. In that whitened stillness, the town lights below flicker faintly, softened by the snowfall, until they resemble distant stars. You know they are there, living their lives, carrying their stories. But they do not need you tonight. Tonight, your only purpose is to rest beneath the kindness of darkness. Your breath finds an even deeper rhythm. The warmth of the room wraps around your shoulders, not heavy, not smothering, just supportive, like a soft hand resting reassuringly across your back. Nothing is rushing you. Nothing is pulling you forward. Sleep approaches the way twilight approaches evening edges, quietly, gradually, respectfully. It does not push. It simply arrives. Thoughts still appear from time to time, but they no longer cling. They drift past like leaves floating across a pond. You watch them move, then dissolve, and the water beneath becomes still again. You don't need to analyze. You don't need to judge. You don't even need to understand. The night understands for you. Even the things you couldn't express, the worries you kept tucked behind calm expressions, the questions you never voiced, the tiredness you carried quietly, the night sees them gently and holds them without burdening you. You feel lighter, not because problems vanish, but because you no longer have to carry them right now. They can wait. Morning will come, and with it clarity, strength, and gentle courage. But those belong to another time, to another version of you, waking, refreshed, ready. The you who sits here now has earned peace, while your eyelids grow heavy, not with exhaustion, but with trust. They flutter once, then stay closed just a moment longer each time, as if the world behind them offers a softer landscape, a place made of clouds and quiet fields waiting beneath moonlight. Your breathing remains slow and tender. The quiet crackling of the last embers becomes the softest lullaby. The attic sighs like an old friend, content, peaceful, knowing you found what you came here for. Rest is not an accident. It is a gift the night offers, and you are finally accepting it. You imagine the door to the attic slowly closing, not shutting you in, but gently sealing the space like a cocoon of quiet warmth. Inside, everything is soft light, sound, thought feeling. Outside snow deepens, inside calm deepens. Even your heartbeat seems to sway with the rhythm of the fire's fading glow, slower, steadier, more grounded. The mind releases its last threads, and in their place come images softer than dreams. A winter path beneath lantern light, a distant cabin welcoming travelers home, a sky filled with stars that never hurry, never worry, simply exist in quiet brilliance. And somehow knowing that, you feel okay simply existing too. Not performing, not proving, just being. The journal, the chair, the attic, they will be here again if you ever need them. Safe places do not disappear. They wait patiently for the next time your heart seeks refuge. And when that time comes, you'll know the way back. For now, though, the attic fades gently into darkness, not lost, just blending with the night, while your awareness drifts across the borderland between waking and sleep. There is no cliff here, no sudden drop, just a slow descent into softness, a floating downwards, a gentle drifting, a peaceful surrender. The last ember flickers. The snow hushes the world outside. The night draws closer, like a blanket being tucked in around you. And with one final, easy breath, the kind that feels like coming home, your body settles completely. Every part of you loosens and settles into stillness. Here, now, you are safe. You are warm. You are allowed to rest. Let the night carry you. Let dreams take the weight you no longer need to hold. Let sleep arrive quietly, kindly, fully, like a soft tide coming in at last. And as you drift deeper into that peace, a final, quiet whisper seems to echo through the attic, through the snow, through the gentle darkness around you. You've done enough for today. You can let go now, sleep and rest, and be held by the kindness of the night.